We're also talking, there's an ongoing narrative, really, isn't there, about child vaccinations. Beverley Turner, the TV presenter, and, well, I'm about to say, turned campaigner. Bev is with us in the studio. The days of Zoom are now gone again,
It's
Beverley.
nice to see you. I can't believe it's taken me this long to come in. I only live down the road, really, and I keep talking to you down the lens. It's so nice to be here in person. Here.
Although we did do a TV thing, didn't we, together?
We did. We've worked together several times. Over the years.
And now if Silas, when I first knew you, if somebody had said, fast forward a few years, and you're going to be still working in TV and radio studios, but you'll be talking about child vaccinations, you'd have looked at them a bit funny and told them to clear off. And yet here we are.
But here we are. But I think when people keep saying to me, you're enjoying being a bit controversial, Bev. I don't think I'm being deliberately controversial. No. To me, it's just so obvious. The facts are so clear before us of what significant events are happening across the world and the effects on children. And I think I've always been a questioner, Ian. I've always been a slightly critical thinker. I always like to. I'm a journalist by trade and an English graduate. And so I've always sort of analysed situations. And it just became really clear to me quite early on that a lot of this COVID picture didn't add up. It didn't add up. And when the government is saying to me, you can't see your family, and I'm very close to my family, that's when my heckles, and I say, okay, what do you mean I can't see my family? And so it just piqued my interest, and it has become pretty much a full-time job. I'm currently involved in legal action against the government to stop them vaccinating children. And so it's very time-consuming, but it's not nice to do something because this is just an awful. I'd like to open my eyes every day and this not be happening. But it is good to feel that I can do something because I'm contacted every day by people who feel helpless. Yeah.
And just tell us the root of all of this then, because obviously there's lots of areas of lockdown itself that you just touched on it there with not seeing family and these. Every now and again you stumble across, more videos of those moments of somebody knocking on the window of a care home to say hello to their, 100-year-old mother who doesn't know what's going on. It's absolutely heartbreaking. You think, was that really the only way this could have been dealt with? So there's all of that. And of course, when all of that was first going on, we didn't know about this thing of child vaccine because they didn't have an adult vaccine then. And yet here we are. On this curious, almost this journey by installments is how it feels. Here's a vaccine. Here's what we want to do with it. We think that group should take it. And in fact, once that group's got it, and I'm just talking about the older people here, the vulnerable, I think this is a reasonable representation of what we all thought. Once that group has got it, then we might talk about other adults, but to be honest, that's the group we need to vaccinate, and that will be job done.
Yeah. Well, it's felt like a sort of death by 1,000 cuts, hasn't it? And the part that's missing from the narrative for me and for so many people is the why. And I keep seeing online people reposting the video of Chris Whitty saying, a year ago, for the vast majority of people, this will be a mild flu-like illness. Every interview with him should play that first and ask him what changed.
Yes.
And then they announced,
and it is the case as well.
And it is the case.
Yes.
And then, of course, when Matt Hancock stood up in the House of Commons, a really famous clip again where he says, this will not be for young children, this will not be for young people, this will be for the over 70s. And we all breathed a sigh of relief. This is brilliant because it was significant. It was clear that there were significant numbers of death in the elderly, average age of death 82. Great. And then suddenly I remember distinctly seeing the headline. I think it was in August last year. And the headline was, we will vaccinate the over 50s. And then I knew where we were going. I knew where we were going because there was no clinical reason to vaccinate the over 50s. And then I thought, well, if you can do that without any explanation, it will be over 40s, over 30s, over 20s. And now, of course...
But did you expect kids, though, at that stage?
Did I expect kids? No, I don't think so. But then as soon as they got to 20s, what's coming.
That's the direction.
Because really, there's no difference between a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old. There's no difference between 17 and 15 for a lot physiologically. And now I'm part of a campaign to stop them randomly rolling out these jabs to 12 and above. And in other countries, they're already doing babies. Yeah. So we will start to offer these to parents of children that are newborn babies up to the age of 12. And I remind you, the average age of death is 82.
What I think has also stuck as the most troubling aspect, as if it's not everything you've just said isn't already troubling. So the announcement comes against their own scientific advice, which just makes it even more interesting.
Astonishing.
So there's that. And then, because we were told, listen to the science. And then the science says, well, we don't think there's any reason to do this. And it's like, well, we'll do it anyway. Just to compound the curious, unfathomable nature of this, we're then told that children won't have to seek parental permission to have a vaccination. I don't even know where to begin trying to square that circle, Beth.
I don't know where to go with that, because it sets a very dangerous precedent. It is the government, it is politicians parenting our children. From what I can see, Boris Johnson is a pretty rubbish parent by all accounts. I would not be wanting to take parenting lessons off a man who won't even tell us how many children he has. So I think there is a confluence of conflicts of interest. I think they are not thinking it through. I think obviously the final stage is vaccine passports. It is about a biometric digital ID, which does not work unless your whole family is on board with that. Because if I want to get on an aeroplane with my children and I have a 2-year-old who hasn't had the jab, they can't have a digital biometric ID. So the whole system falls apart. That's inevitably where this is going to go, because there is no clinical and scientific reason. There's no health and motivation to give children this. So in the absence of them telling us what it is, we have to draw our own conclusions. And I don't particularly like to go down that line because it has so far sounded like it has been written off as a conspiracy.
It's a bit David Icke, isn't it? Or it would have been.
It is a bit David Icke, but I think it sort of is and it isn't. It is if you look at what the majority of the mainstream media has been saying. But if you look at the government website, in 2017, Matt Hancock was there introducing Klaus Schwab onto the stage, talking about the fourth industrial revolution, talking about Bitcoin and the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. It has been hiding in plain sight. I just wish they'd let us discuss it. I just wish they'd let us have conversations about what this will mean in actuality.
So you're convinced that actually this is now almost nothing to do with
totally
COVID.
And I think whilst we are all talking about a virus with such a significant survival rate, we're taking our eye off. And that's precisely what we're intended to do. That's what they want us to do, because we're looking at a kind of a biometric surveillance state in which what we know now as freedom will be a thing of the past. It will be a distant memory. It will be unrecognisable. And our freedoms are so important. And it reminds me a lot at the moment of when we used to talk about Brexit. I mean, this makes Brexit look like a flipping egg and spoon race, doesn't it? The conflict we're having now. But when we used to talk about Brexit, I was hosting a radio show and I used to ask people, ring up and tell me what this is going to mean for me in actuality, because I wasn't that bothered either way, really. I probably would have been predominantly Remainer, but I didn't really know. I just wanted to know what my life would look like on the other side. And that's what we're not talking about now. And if people start to understand that if you're in a restaurant and you've had too many alcoholic drinks that week, your card will be stopped on your phone because the state will know that you've drunk too much, or that you've had too many calories, or that you haven't been and done your voluntary service, or you've used too much electricity, or used too much water, and therefore you won't be allowed to turn on the taps. I mean,
but some might
say,
Bev, you've watched too much Charlie Brooker. You've been watching too much Black Mirror. You've swallowed the conspiracy. You've kind of looked at it and thought, well, there's a bit I understand, so I'm going to run with this.
I mean, we don't, but this is the trouble.
It's a vaccine. It helps people.
To do what?
It stops people having a worse case of the COVIDs.
I mean, that's just it works. Okay, if the vaccine,
it'll keep you out of hospital. Boris Johnson told me this, so that's how I know Beverley Turner.
Exactly, but I mean, the vaccines are doing a very good job of preventing those who were vulnerable and remain vulnerable from being hospitalised and dying.
So you're not disputing that.
I'm not disputing that. As we know, when it comes to transmission, there's very little evidence that they're preventing transmission, and it doesn't stop you catching COVID. So we all have to just take personal responsibility for how we want to live our lives in that respect. It's not about that, because you know what, Ian, COVID will be gone, and then we will be talking about something else, and it will be about have you had your blood pressure checked today? Sure. Have you had your vitamins? And once the health of our health and our data are connected, under the sort of auspices of big government doing what is right for us, we no longer live in a free society.
And I would agree with that, because the idea of being, when people say, well, if you've got nothing to hide, it doesn't matter. It's like, well, okay, in that case, Yeah, I think we all did.
Yeah.
And that, let's put a camera then in your living room because, what have you got to worry about other than a little bit of horizontal gymnastics once in a while? There's nothing for you to hide. What's the problem? Have one looking at your front door. Stick a microphone on your lawn so we could be sure there's no crimes being. We don't live in that world. We don't want to live in that world. We know that there are places. Every kind of dystopian movie has been made around about those kind of themes. We know that China has their social credit system up and running.
I honestly don't think there are a series of powerful men in offices stroking white cats simultaneously and plotting to bring down the planet and to remake it in their own image. I think there's quite a lot of sort of demagoguery going on. We've got huge technocrats, but I believe that they think they're doing what's right for us. I think there is a benevolent impetus behind it in terms of saving the planet. And in terms of organising humanity could probably do with a little more organising, and technology allows us to do that. And it will certainly help the state in terms of us making sure we all pay our tax because there'll be no cash. But we need to talk about it. And that's what's so frustrating. When I go on all these daytime shows and we're saying, will you have a vaccine? Will you not have a vaccine? Will your children have a vaccine? That's not what we should be talking about. And in a way, that's not what the government needs to be talking to us about. We're not idiots. Some of it might be good.
So you're not saying, just to be clear, that, because this is kind of the point that I think I've been arguing for ages, that these things might happen, but it's not because of some Illuminati sitting in a cave in Argentina with a joystick controlling our movements.
No.
It's actually about sort of the pragmatics. Governments love databases, don't they? Even conservative governments. They say they don't, but they do. They love the idea. If you can make things nice and organised and everything is, all your ducks are in a row, press a button, that gets sorted, it takes away all the pressure. You tend not to have any crime as well, or you reduce crime, you reduce lots of things. Life is easier, but our fundamental privacy is completely not just challenged, but removed.
And it's not even just privacy in a way. It's just about freedom of movement, freedom of communication, freedom of employment. I saw a beautiful moving video yesterday of an ethics professor in Canada that I put on my Twitter feed. And she is explaining how she has spent 20 years working in a university, and if she presented to her students the concept of someone who'd done their job good for 20 years, who was being told that their bodily autonomy no longer existed because they had to take an injection that they didn't want, that is in a clinical trial with no long-term data for a disease from which she was statistically at incredibly low risk of being ill, and you were told if you do not do this, you lose your job. And when you put it from a philosophy and an ethics professor, when you put it in those terms, you realise how badly wrong our world, how society has gone. And she does this piece to camera, and then she just bursts into tears at the end, and it comes up to say she lost her job.
Just briefly, Bev, because we've nearly hit the clock, but just explain them what you're doing about this challenge on kids getting vaccinated. So, where does that go?
So obviously the government have... the MHRA, so the Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, gave Pfizer permission to give the vaccine to under 18, 16 to 18, 16, 17. And the JCVI said no. 2 weeks later, mysteriously, the JCVI, the guy who stood up on stage and said, we've changed our mind, whose department is funded by Pfizer, funnily enough, that happened. And we had already taken action to get the MHRA. We wanted a judicial review. Why have you given them the green light? You need to justify that in a court because the balance and risk does not add up. That has been kicked into the long grass. We asked for 2 injunctions because then it became clear that they're planning on vaccinating 12 to 16s. We've gone to the court twice. They have not even given us half a day. We wanted half a day to set out to an impartial judge why this is not necessary. And we haven't been given the permission to do that, which is almost unprecedented to say, can you give us half an hour? Because the significance of this is, half a day. The significance of this is so huge that lives may be lost. And we were told no. So the government have asked for more time, and we now look like we will probably have our day in court about the last week of September. But in the meantime, it will happen. But in the meantime, they will continue to quickly roll out jabs to 12 to 16-year-olds. I believe Chris Whitty, the CMOs, have not given permission for this. They've not given their okay. Do they need to give permission? I don't think this government cares. I think they'll do it anyway. But in the meantime, it's like going to the council and saying, going to court and saying the council are going to bulldoze my house, and the court says we'll deal with it in 2 weeks. And you go, well, by that point, my house is going to be
gone.
bulldozed.
We'll deal with it after. But in the meantime, I mean, parents can say they don't want their kid to have the vaccine, right? They can say,
they must, and they must. And I speak.
But some might want it, Bev. Some might say, actually, I don't believe what Beverley Turner is saying. I don't believe some of these headlines. So I want my kid to have that for added protection. What's the worst that could happen?
Vulnerable children already are allowed to have it. So children who have pre-existing medical conditions can already have it. But if you look at how many healthy children died in the UK of COVID last year, there was 3,105 children died of all causes in the UK. That's everything from a road accident to cancer to COVID. And 25 0 to 17s died of COVID-19. 76% of them had pre-existing life-limiting comorbidities. Healthy children are at a zero statistical risk of dying from COVID-19. If they weren't, Ian, believe me, if my children all knew a child that had died, we of course would be vaccinating our children against this disease, because it would be, on a risk-benefit analysis, it would be worth it. But it is not. And I think for those parents who think it is worth it, they need to look at alternative sources of information, because even looking at Pfizer's own trial, children will be harmed. This is a very strong drug. It is a brand new technology. It's very different.
Pfizer would say that isn't the case.
Well, I can tell you,
they would say if they were here that we
wouldn't
wouldn't be wheeling something out that was dangerous.
Well, none of it. They have admitted that they don't know any long-term effects, and they can't, and they are completely financially protected. They're immune from prosecution. But even if I just tell you kind of from the Pfizer's own trial, which was 1,131 children that they vaccinated between the ages of 12 to 15, and they didn't follow them for any longer than 2 weeks after their second jab. And in those children, there was one life-threatening event in 1,000 kids. So that's the size of any British urban high school. You will have one life-threatening event. So kids will die. And you will have 65 headache cases, 650 headaches, 30 cases of vomiting, 200 children will have a temperature. You know, these, as any adult who's had the vaccine will know, you get a reaction.
Yeah.
And these reactions in children are strong, and they tend to have very mild COVID, which doesn't keep them off school.
We stop there, Bev. We've overshot, and we're going to both be in trouble for that. You know what it's like in radio. However, come back in. I mean, you have to come back in and talk more about this. We'd like to follow this, the next step, the next stage, and where you go with this. But thank you, Beverley.
You're welcome.
Beverley Turner with us here on Talk Radio.